Hello and welcome to another episode of It Could Only Happen on Earth, the show where we look at the most bizarre, strange, and thought-provoking encounters from around the world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as does every week is my good friend Paul Seaburn. Paul, we've got an amazing lineup of stories coming up. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, Marcus. Thank you, and good to hear that you're doing well too. I hope everybody out there is doing well. Yes, an amazing, amazing array of story. I was thinking, our show is called "It Could Only Happen on Earth," and I wonder if we might be enticing aliens with these stories to say, "Wow, this looks like an interesting place that these guys are talking about. Let's go visit them." And see if they're for real or not.
Yes,
Who
certainly.
knows?
You don't know. It's certainly like a good reality show. I'm sure they're tuning in out there, Paul, for sure. Uh,
They're
well,
definitely tuning in. Yeah.
well, okay, let's give them something to think about then, Paul, including our viewers. The first story, exploding head syndrome. What is this? And most importantly, do I need to be worried?
Yeah, it's in my time writing for Mysterious Universe, I remember covering this a couple of times when instances occurred, and not to make light of it because it's a serious a malady, but it's also probably perhaps the funniest name for a malady I have ever heard, especially since if you look up someone who has had exploding head syndrome, they still have a head. So what exactly are we talking about here? So there's a new study out. That's the reason why it's in the news about exploding head syndrome and how it's on the rise, which we hopefully will deliver some information and maybe allay some fears if people are wondering how they could possibly catch it. Um, Professor Flavie Waters is her name. She's at the School of Psychological Science at the University of Western Australia. She's one of the researchers and the head author on the paper. She says that exploding head syndrome in the scientific world is known as parasomnia, which doesn't sound too much less scary to me. Parasomnia, um, but even it could be worse. The other name for it is episodic cranial sensory shock, which I don't want that. I don't want to be anywhere near that. So we'll go with parasomnia.
Good
so
call.
so it's a sleep disorder, obviously. Occurs when you're either falling, in that state of almost falling asleep or almost waking up, that subconscious area where all those weird things happen. People see ghosts. We talk about sleep paralysis. We also talk about that being a very creative uh, state to be in. There's a famous story of Einstein who used to sit in his easy chair and hold a silver dollar, uh, and hoping that he would almost fall asleep and drop the silver dollar, which would kind of startle him, and he would be in a creative state. So, if it's good enough for Einstein, I believe it myself. So, the the name obviously comes from hearing a noise. People who experience it say there's a noise deep inside their head. Some call it an explosion. Sounds like fireworks. Sounds like gunshots. Maybe not as severe, a door slamming, um, crashing waves, maybe a buzzing sound. So there's a lot of different descriptions of it, but all of them seem to occur in that period of time. But it can also happen multiple times a night. So if you're a restless sleeper, it could start and stop and start and stop. Um, if you don't feel, most people don't feel pain. However, occasionally someone will feel a very brief, sharp pain in their head, like a very brief headache. Some people say they see flashes of light. They feel like tingling all over their body, or they suddenly feel hot. Um, so I feel hot a lot when I'm in bed. It's not. I'm hoping that I don't have any of the other symptoms. The bad news is it's on the rise. Now, this is an amazing statistic, Marcus. 10% of the population, the world population, has the syndrome regularly. 10% of the population. 30% have had it at least once. It's more frequent in women, unfortunately, and in people over the age of 50. So you've got, if you're a woman, if you're approaching 50, here's something else you've got to look forward to. The worst news, though, is that doctors can't find a cause. Uh, they said it could be due to lack of sleep, could be anxiety, could be stress, could be the medications that you're taking to relieve your anxiety and stress. So, there's no relief there. It could be caused by too much caffeine before you go to bed, too much alcohol before you go to bed, which seem to cause a lot of problems. Most commonly, it's they believe from a scientific standpoint, it comes from the part of the brain which is responsible for the transition between awake and asleep. So mysterious area, obviously, we're still doing dream research. They don't know what exactly is going on, where exactly that place might be. Um, so, um, but again, the reason why we're talking about it is because it's on the rise. They don't, and even worse, they not only do they not have a specific cause, they don't have a cure. So, and this is the worst part. That they what the study says is, don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. It's not a serious malady. I'm sorry. Don't tell me that if you're a doctor, because I'm going to find somebody else. They said don't do any of those things. Don't drink alcohol before you go to bed. Well, geez, this is you got to be in give me something better to go on. The good news is if you're listening to us, you're in good company. You're in good company. So there's case reports of exploding head syndrome have been around since 1876. So it's not a new malady. You would think they would have a cause or a cure by now. One of the first reports came from a guy by the name of Silas Weir Mitchell. And he described, I think he was a doctor or a physicist. He described it as sensory discharges in a patient. And he believed that it was caused by smoking. Now, I didn't see any references in the study about smoking. But the earliest and most famous case, so to show you what good company you're in, was French philosopher René Descartes. In 1691, he wrote about having this syndrome, but he thought it was something good. He thought it was what may be giving him the ideas for his new philosophy. So he writes about having 3 dreams in one night, and it was the second dream where he was hearing these loud noises, like his head was exploding. And by the time he had awakened that morning, Descartes had already formulated his theory of analytical geometry and the idea of applying mathematical knowledge to philosophy. As a math major, I have a soft spot in my heart for Descartes and for all of that. So I'm just blown away, not to make fun of exploding heads. I'm blown away by this story. Descartes, most people know, is the guy who came up with cogito ergo sum, the Latin phrase, which means I think, therefore I am. So, maybe his problem was that he was thinking too hard before he went to sleep. And not only did he prove his existence, but he may have proven the existence of exploding head syndrome. And there you have our malady for the week, courtesy of It Could Only Happen on Earth.
So, first thing I want to say is I wish I'd have known about this 20, 30 years ago. I'd have used this to my advantage when I had to go in the office. I said, no, I've exploding head syndrome. I can't come in today. But this is a new one on me. Listening to you speaking there, though, I don't know, but I kind of think I might have experienced this. Not loud noises, but, like sometimes when you're asleep and you're drifting off, as you say, and you almost kind of feel like you're falling, and it starts you back awake again. It's a weird thing. It's probably like a muscle spasm or something like that. But I have had a few times where, especially when I've been really tired, and drifting off to sleep, and it's just like a feeling of somebody. I've never had this, so I don't know how accurate it is, but like someone's putting like an electrical charge through my skull, like a zoom, and it wakes me up. And I think, well, is that why it is? Maybe I've had that about half a dozen times in my life, so I don't know. It's interesting though. You're saying it's on the rise. So there's got to be a reason for that. I mean, you would think, and it's just gone, diagnosed over the years. But I'm thinking there's a massive increase in waves, electrical waves, sound waves, radio waves, all going about all everywhere. It makes me think, is it tied to that perhaps? So Yeah, I mean, it's interesting stuff. I don't know if I've had that. I've certainly had sleep paralysis once, which was terrifying, and I definitely knew that was sleep paralysis. It was nothing else, you know.
Yeah.
But you're right though. That state between waking and falling asleep, and the opposite way around, you're coming out of sleep. Your mind. I don't want to say it plays tricks on you because I don't think it's that either. I think, like you say, it's almost accessing these parts of the brain that are maybe cut off from you during waking states. And a good example of this is when we had a couple of years of, I wouldn't say paranormal activity, but strange goings on in the house here. And during that period, I didn't think too much of it at the time. But when I would wake up, I could hear people talking, and I'd think, no, it's my lad. He's left his bloody telly on. So I'd like get out of bed, and by the time I'd got to the room, not only was the telly not on, I couldn't hear the voices anymore. And I never really thought much about it. I just thought it's just a leftover from sleep. Fast forward a few years when I'm really delving into the paranormal, I'm thinking, I've had that. That's what that was. So it makes me wonder whether, I don't know, but what it does go to show, I think, is that the human mind is just a fascinating thing. And we know so little about it. There's just so much more to discover, Paul, I think.
Yes, it is. It is. And you pointed out an interesting phrase that we probably shouldn't use as often as we do, and that the mind is playing tricks on you.
Yeah.
Because it's not playing tricks, it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. We just don't understand it. And I think that's the cause right there. And you're right. Well, anxiety is on the rise, stress is on the rise. People are drinking more, using more adult substances. But we could be causing our own exploding head syndrome. So I hope that maybe we've helped someone listening out there to deal with what might be happening to them, and delve a little bit more into a consciousness, which is what you're going to be talking about next year. So tell us about that.
Well, yeah, this is an interesting one. I was doing something only the last couple of days. Just kind of popped into my feed, and it kind of took me a bit. So, there's a big debate ongoing right now about reality. What is reality? What is consciousness? I mean, philosophers have been wrestling with this for centuries, essentially. It's not a new thing. So outside of the normal, that the consciousness is simply the brain reacting, stimuli reacting to everything around you, or reacting to stimuli, should I say. There's been alternative theories. Now, one of those, up until recently, was something called, let me just check this, panpsychism. And that is, it's been around for hundreds of years. And the Italian philosopher Francesco Patrizzi was the gentleman that coined this phrase, and he used Greek terminology with the pan, which means everything, and psyche, which means soul and mind. And what he was driving at was that everything has a consciousness, not just us, whether it's a living creature, whether even stone, trees, vegetation, it all has consciousness. And even Plato said way back in the day that, the world is alive with a soul and intelligence. So, people have kind of ran with this, and it was really quite popular as we went into the 21st century. However, recently, a new philosophy or theory has come out, which is the complete opposite of panpsychism. Consciousness is essentially an illusion. He was saying that instead of consciousness being everywhere, consciousness is nowhere, basically. And that, we're kind of we've lied to ourselves through evolution that we control consciousness, that we react to stimuli and things of that nature. And so that's a frightening prospect in its own right, because what that kind of suggests is that we're nothing more than literal vessels, and we've no control over everything. And and basically this is illusionism, is what that is. And Keith Frankish from the University of Sheffield, he has kind of took this to a new level as well in more recent times. Now what he was saying is that it's down to mental self-manipulation. And as I was saying there, we react to stimuli. We think that's our consciousness reacting, but essentially we're nothing but vessels, and the world around us is not real. It's just not there, and that goes to consciousness as well. Now, as you might imagine, mainstream science has fought back against this, and he said, there's no proof of this. There's more proof that consciousness does exist. But what I found fascinating about it is that we don't really know what consciousness is. And it's so. Is it coming from outside? Is everything conscious? If it is conscious, is that collective memories, that we're experiencing? It just kind of it made me start thinking about, what it actually is to exist. I mean, you mentioned a phrase there on our last story, I think, therefore I am, which makes perfect sense. But I suppose what I'm saying is, where is that thinking coming from? Is it coming from inside of us, or is that thought and that consciousness and that inspiration, all of those things, is it coming from outside? And if these guys are right and illusionism is correct, then what does that make us? And what does that mean for life after death? If there is such a thing, where do we go from here? Are we just an empty vessel? So, yeah, I think there's a lot to delve into there. I don't know if I buy into this guy in terms of, like, you know, illusionism and consciousness isn't real. I just think there's too much going on. We've just been speaking about how fascinating the human mind is. But I'm not sure if you've come across this, Paul, and what your own thoughts about consciousness are, because it really, exactly, it kind of makes you, it turns you in tails, doesn't it? Really, spins you around, and
it's an interesting subject. You know, probably too deep for me to spend a lot of time, you know, during my random free periods of time. However, I have thought about it, and I agree with you, Marcus. I'm not convinced in any way that we're a vessel and consciousness is outside of us. I'm of the opinion that consciousness is inside of us and we do have control over it. That being said, one of the things that I was waiting to hear, and they generally don't talk about this, is not just our own consciousness, but the consciousness of all the other living creatures on Earth and maybe in other places. But let's just stick with Earth for a second. Where are we the only life form on Earth with consciousness? And if not, you know, if so, why? If not, where does consciousness begin in the evolutionary process? Is it strictly animals? Are plants conscious? Are bacteria and some of the lowest one cell, two cell forms of life, are they conscious as well? You know, you could think about this for days and days and days and come up with no answer, but probably write some good papers or books that you could sell. I don't know. So yeah, I rather than going too deep into it, I do say I'm not in favor of consciousness as an illusion. I'm not in favor of consciousness as a simulation or life as a simulation. That's another one that I have a difficult time accepting. So I kind of put those two in the same, maybe not in the same bucket, but at least in the same Venn diagram. They do overlap each other. But wow, you know, what an interesting subject, and worth studying the heck out of to see if we can come up with it. I like the idea also that there's no religion involved in this, because religion would just muddy that water just till you couldn't see through it at all. But you know they have an opinion as well.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I mean, the consideration of animals having consciousness. I mean, I suppose what you'd say is there's different levels of consciousness, maybe, because, you know, you look at dogs, cats. There's clearly, you know, recall. You know what I mean? You know, and even down to, like, you know, God forbid, but if a person treats their dog badly, for example, they'll remember that, and that evokes fear, evokes emotion. So that's consciousness right there. But you look at, like you say, bacteria and amoebas and things really small. But there's a certain amount of consciousness there because of cellular memory, and you know, and how they reproduce and things like that. So and how they can survive, and it goes, like you say, the list goes on and on. So maybe there's perhaps different levels of consciousness. It's interesting though, and I don't like. It's a tough one separating human beings out from for other animals on the planet. Is there something different about us? Is there something different about our consciousness? Now, people will say, well, the only difference really is that we're kind of aware of our own mortality, whereas most animals, they're not. You know, even if they understand the death, it's not something that's preys on their mind like it does humans. But again, I'm not necessarily a religious person, but there does seem to be something different about human beings in terms of, you know, human beings today act completely different to how human beings were acting thousands of years ago. In some ways, you know, in others, not so much. But most animals, they kind of act exactly the same as they always have. I know evolution happens and it's happening all the time, and I get that. So I'm not like saying evolution's not a thing. I'm not saying that. But, you know, you don't see, I know this is trite, but you don't see like groups of horses organizing themselves. You don't see dogs having a religion. You know, none of those things. They're acting the same way as they always have done, whereas humans are just seemingly progressing, or at least they think we're progressing. So, yeah, I think that's what fascinates me about consciousness. It is, could we study consciousness and reveal more about humanity, reality, and just why we do act so differently, Paul. It's like you say,
Yeah.
it's a show in itself, isn't it? Really, consciousness, right there.
Yeah. And when do we get it? Is it are we do we get consciousness when we're born? Do we get it in the womb? Does it come from both parents? That's one right there. If you're a clone, for example, when where does your consciousness come from then? And when are you conscious? And it's the same with animals. Sometimes, but with cloning now, many people are hoping they'll clone their favorite dog and it will be the same as the dog that they had. Well, that's a form of consciousness, behavior, and memories, and all of that. There is no proof that I have seen where a cloned dog looks up at its owner and remembers it from the dog that it was cloned from. So I'm not sure what that tells me, but it certainly adds to the discussion of where does consciousness come from? Where does it begin? How does it get passed on to the next generation or the next person? I don't know.
No, I mean, yeah, again, it's something. It's one of those conversations to have around a campfire with a few beers. Really, one that's mentioned. I think you mentioned about where does it come from? Does it come from the womb? It's interesting, and I know there's no necessarily proof of this, but people say if you eat certain foods while you're pregnant, if a woman does while she's pregnant, then that baby will develop a taste for that. I've got no proof of this, but for example, and this is really silly. My mother said that when she was pregnant with me, for whatever reason, she ate a lot of tinned tomatoes on toast. It was an easy meal. It was cheap. And she liked it. That's what she ate. And for years as a child, I loved that. And I'm not really keen now, but I just did, and I'm not sure whether that was something inside me that reminded me of the womb, if you like. But yeah, I mean, and again, that's cellular memory. So again, it's a show in itself. We're going to have to do that. But
Yeah.
we'll draw a line under that one, though, Paul, because the aliens and the UFOs, it's rolling on. We've had more commentary from people up in high places who you would think would have more to deal with right now. But no, they've found time to comment on this. So I wonder if you could tell us about this, Paul.
There you go. Yeah. Not too many people are talking about consciousness as an illusion other than us and some scientists, but everybody's talking about UFOs, it seems. And it has crossed the line into politics. And this is not a recent thing. If the listeners to our show know that we've talked about presidential candidates and presidents like Ronald Reagan and Richard Nixon and more recently Barack Obama and the current president Trump. They've all talked about UFOs and releasing the files and UFOs they may have seen. However, not as many of them talk about aliens. It's more the experience of seeing a UFO as opposed to seeing living or dead aliens. Now, we did talk about President Eisenhower and his alleged experiences with signing a treaty with visiting aliens or maybe aliens that were already on Earth. So, but more recently, senators and representatives in the United States are really picking up on this extraterrestrial existence. And the thing that I've noticed, and that's what we're going to talk about, is that although many of them say that they believe that there are extraterrestrials and we can't be alone, very few of them agree on what they might be, what they might look like, where they come from, all of the details that we really want to know. And there's a couple of recent statements that led to that. So the first one was from Matt Gaetz. In the United States, he's a fairly well-known former politician. He was a representative to Congress from Florida. He claimed recently that he received a briefing while he was in office in Florida in a, quote, non-classified setting from someone who was wearing a uniform of the United States Army. That's the way he put it. He was wearing the uniform of someone. And the briefing was on, and these are Gates' words, hybrid breeding programs in the United States where captured aliens were breeding with humans to create a hybrid race that could engage in intergalactic communication. Now, that's the juicy kind of stuff we want coming out from the UFO files. But here we have a and I will point out a disgraced former congressperson who is revealing it with some very nebulous little details, like the wearing the uniform of someone in the military, not actually saying they were in the military. He also said that humans involved in this military program have been, and I quote, abducted from war zones and from the caravans of migrants. Now, those are very controversial things around the world here that people are being used in experiments. That just sets off alarms all over the place, besides breaking all kinds of international laws. And here he is talking about it just nonchalantly. He said he was told that there are 6 to 12 facilities involved in doing this. Now, he didn't say in the United States or around the world, but I'm going to guess it was the United States. However, and here's the big however, he conceded that he did not verify the person's claims. So, boy, red flags flying all over the place here. Nonetheless, he said all this stuff in public. Now, J.D. Vance, our vice president, um, he recently said that he has an obsession with UFOs and extraterrestrials. And in a recent interview, he said, and I quote, I don't think they're aliens. I think they're demons anyway. So, we talked about this. There's a whole group of people who don't accept that what many people call aliens or extraterrestrials are from another planet or another galaxy. They believe that they are demons, and always were here since the time of creation, and they're tormenting us and taking the various shapes that demons take. But this guy's the vice president of the United States, and he says, uh, I think that celestial beings who fly around do weird things to people. I think that the desire to describe everything celestial, everything unworldly, to describe it as alien. So he's saying that, you know, it's not necessarily the it may be a mistake to automatically say, well, if what I'm seeing is a gray being with a giant head and slanted eyes and a skinny body is an alien. He's saying no, it could also be something else. Could be a demon. If you want to take it further than that, it could be some new animal form that we've never seen. Uh, so this is a highly accepted belief as well. So I did some research on politicians talking about aliens, and it goes back. I can't believe this. It goes back to the beginnings of the United States, to the 1639. A guy by the name of John Winthrop, who kids in the United States studying their history know he was one of the original pilgrims coming over early in the immigration. He was the governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He wrote in 1639 that some of his fellow Puritans were seeing UFOs. They were also experiencing time lapses, something that we talk about all the time. They felt that they were teleported, and they saw humanoids that they could not explain. 1639, governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, famous enough to end up in our history books. Benjamin Franklin, not president, but has currency named after him, so he must be pretty popular and important. he said that every star is a sun, and every sun nourishes, quote, a chorus of worlds just like ours. That was many people say that he's admitting that he believes in extraterrestrial. Thomas Jefferson wrote about a UFO in 1800. Now, he didn't see it himself, but he was told this story by a reliable source who was in Louisiana in 1800, said that they saw multiple witnesses there. He was speaking for all the witnesses, a UFO the size of a large bus. Now, he didn't say that because there weren't buses at that time, 70 to 80 feet long, 200 yards above the surface of the earth, luminous, but not emitting sparks, and described as a crimson red. So, well, it sounds good, sounds like a hard to explain UFO. Unfortunately, then he says that there was a noise and an explosion. So my guess is that they could have been seeing an asteroid. But they could, just using the other logic, there could be something else. We don't always assume that bright lights causing explosions are asteroids. But the best one, Marcus, is this guy. His name is David Rittenhouse. Now, not as well known as the other ones. He was an inventor in Philadelphia and an astronomer. He gave a speech to the Second Continental Congress as they're putting together the Constitution and this new country. He gave a speech where he said the doctrine of the plurality of worlds is inseparable from the principles of astronomy. So he's saying that astronomy, the science, and the existence of aliens have to be considered together. They can't be considered separately. Then he says, and I love this quote. He says, if extraterrestrials are unfortunate enough to visit Earth, they might find themselves enslaved in America merely because their bodies may be disposed to reflect or absorb the rays of the sun in a way different from ours. So he's almost, it's like going back to Matt Gaetz. We're going to be enslaved. Aliens shouldn't come here because we're going to be enslaving them because they look different than us. Well, going through human history, I would say that's a safe bet to bet your money on. But this guy said it at the beginnings of our country. So they were thinking about that way back then. So the point being that the discussion of UFOs, and especially now we see the discussion of extraterrestrial among the political leaders in the United States. I know it happens in your country as well, happens around the world. It's been going on for a long time. So those files that we're waiting for, they must be huge if they've been writing it down, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just thinking there about the United States. It's been going on for a while. In the UK, there was I know there was airship sightings in America in the 1890s. Well, they had them in the UK in about 1911, 1912. And, wow, the police were investigating all of those things. But, God, there's a lot to unpack there, Paul, actually. So I'm going to be surfing along on some speculation here because it's made me think of lots of things. The hybridization thing. Now, to most people, that's bizarre. That's completely science fiction. However, when you speak to some researchers, and I've asked them this, and I've almost debated, should I ask them, or does it make the interview, stupid, if you like? And a lot of them say, oh, no, this is a real thing. David Jacobs, I think, was one of the big proponents of this. And I know he's backed off a little bit in recent years. But he's devoted entire books to this. John Mack, although he's a little bit more reserved, John Mack's kind of respected inside and outside the UFO community, but he was hinting at this as well. The only logical conclusion to the alien abduction phenomena would be some kind of hybridization program. I think Bud Hopkins was another one who came to similar conclusions. Whether we're getting into advanced genetics here. Can a human and an alien be mixed? Well, perhaps with the advanced knowledge and technology, maybe they can. One thing I don't think people consider with this is that perhaps these aliens are more human-like than we actually give them credit for, or that we think. I know there's the big eyes and the larger heads, but there was a study a few years ago, like a thought experiment, really. And they were imagining what humans might look like in the future, or if they came from a similar planet to Earth, but with slightly different atmospheric conditions and gravity and sunlight and etc. And what they were saying is that they based it on Earth, and they were saying, if we assume humans would have to move underground more because of the atmosphere and deterioration, and that they were doing less and less manual work because of the advancements of technology. And as such, as part of that advancement of technology, we were becoming more collectively intelligent. Well, they were saying that you'd probably have to have a bigger head to enclose the brain, and because you're living in relative darkness compared to the outside, your eyes would probably adapt as well to become slightly larger to allow in more light, and your body would essentially become a little bit more frail because you're not using your muscles as much. So that could be a little in on the hybridization program if you're looking to kind of make a compelling argument for the authenticity or credibility of such claims. I'll be honest, the common sense part of me thinks, no. But the other part of me thinks, well, what if? And I've got a big what if side to my personality. Regarding demons, though, now this I do find interesting because the first thing I was saying this is I was saying this to my wife only a couple of days ago. We were watching a paranormal show. Don't know why I watched them because I find them interesting, but boy, do I run up to bed afterwards and make sure I'm not the last one down here. They're bloody good, but they're scary. But they were dealing with a lot of demonic hauntings. And I was saying to Tracy that I think the word demons is problematic in the same way that portal or gateways are, because it automatically evokes images of sci-fi and demons, again, images of horror films. But when you listen to these descriptions, and again, I've spoke to a lot of paranormal investigators, they'll describe this non-human entity, this has guttural growling noises, and the only word they can really use is a demon, because people will understand that. So when people talk about demons, it's easy to dismiss it, but I think it's the word itself which is problematic. If you believe that there are non-human entities, energies that are existing, and I think that explanation that a lot of the alien encounters could be explained by these demon-like creatures, I think it holds a bit more water than people would like to think, actually. I really do. The facilities is interesting because remote viewers have made similar claims, haven't they, of alien human bases around the world, and not necessarily doing hybridization programs, but working together. And like you say, most of these are in America, near mountains. I think Mount Shasta, the one in Alaska, which I forget the name of. There's another facility near Pine Gap in Australia. They're predominantly in North America, but they are around the world. And again, remote viewing is something which is I won't say it's a science, but it's a taught skill. It's very real. It's not something out of the sci-fi books. You can learn how to do this. So, yeah, I just find it fascinating that, that these conversations are taking place at a high level. One of the things to mention about the Americas and the early sightings of the Americas, and again, I'm surfing on that speculation here, but we all know that a lot of Freemasons kind of signed the Declaration of Independence, so a lot of prominent Freemasons. Some people even refer to America as the Great Masonic Experiment. They wanted to get away from the church, or certainly away from the church having control over things and separate church and politics out, which is a good thing, I think, to be fair. But yeah, some people have really ran with this and said, well, when you look at some of the non-human intelligence connections to Freemasonry, and again that's speculative, but the knowledge that they had, and even the treasures that they some people claim they had. There's some cases in America where it actually looks like there is some kind of otherworldly intervention ensuring that the Americans fought off the British. I think one of the best examples is George Washington at Valley Forge. And, at that point, the Americans, they weren't beaten, but they weren't far off it. The brutal, you'll know this better than me, brutal winter and everything, they were in a bad way. And the rumors or the legends are that Washington received visits from green-skinned entities, people, and they gave him, advice on troop movement, how to take advantage of where the Brits were and how to ambush them, essentially. And they also showed him apparently, a vision of America in the future, and all these metropolises were popping up just as they have done over the last 100 years or so. And so people have said, well, that's obviously alien intervention. Others have said it could be Native Americans who often wore green war paint. But like some people have said, if George Washington was perfectly aware of Native American tribes, if it had been Native Americans, he would have said they were Native Americans, but he didn't. And so there's another one which is a bit more of a reach. And just quickly, I think it was 1812, 1814, part of the war of 1812, and the tornado that rushed in and, basically stopped the Brits from advancing on the White House and put out the fires that they'd started. And that doesn't happen in that area. It's like a really one-off freak occurrence, apparently. So all these things that have been like floating around for years. And we've got people at high level who are speaking of demonic entities, influencing people, and the UFOs are tied up in all that and aliens. So it really is exciting times. I mean, it just blows your mind, Paul. Where do we go from here with this sort of stuff? Outside absolute disclosure.
You're right. We live in exciting times, but we've lived in exciting times as well. So I think that that there's a message there that maybe now is the time to make it even more exciting and push even harder for revelation. I want to point out, I love words. Both of us being writers, I love the usage of words. And you mentioned demon. Maybe we need another word. Another word that I try not to use anymore in a similar mode is pagan. Which has similar connotation. Most people say pagans are heathens, non-believers. They're primitive. It has a primitive connotation to it. No, it just means that they believe in something different than what you believe in. They're not primitive at all. In fact, they may be more advanced than you. So it would be wrong to call them a pagan. The talking about television, one of my favorite TV shows was Lost, and the group that was not part of the group that crashed, they referred to as the others. And the others is a nice term that maybe we should adopt more to describe beings or people or that are not quite the same as us, but they're still close enough that they're just other, just a little different. But yeah, talk about exciting time. The and strange terminology. This is one you have a story coming up that not as common, but it's another word and another name that I absolutely love hearing about. So tell us about this particular paranormal creature.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly in the same camp as demons, and that you mentioned paganism, and obviously witchcraft is associated with paganism, and so yeah, I mean, it's our monster of the week, I guess. This time, it's based around a road called Sally in the Woods, and the Sally in the Woods Banshee is what she's been referred to. Now, this is a road that runs alongside the stretch of the A363. Which is known as Brown's Folly, and that's near Bathford in Somerset, in the south of England. Now, as you might imagine, there's lots of stories and rumours of strange spirits in most forests and most dark places. But in this location, people have reported hearing what they can only describe as terrifying screams coming out of the woods, a woman's scream. And it's apparently connected to not a murder, but almost what's the word when you just kind of put somebody out of society, and that's where it goes back to. Now, there's lots of accounts of this woman living in the area. There's a Sally or Sarah Gibson is what usually comes up, and she lived in the woods in the 1700s. And rumor and legend has it that she lived in a cabin there by herself, and that she died 2 months short of her 100th birthday. So she certainly didn't, her health didn't deteriorate from being out there. We'll come back to the Sarah Gibson shortly, because it does tie in, and there does seem to be some facts surrounding that. Very recently, though, a gentleman called Jamie Vaughan, he was called, he had his own encounter in the woods with this menacing entity. He was speaking about it. He says that he used to drive up there with his friends, with the cars, like people do when they're younger. And he would often hear strange knocking on the vehicles. They all would, coming from outside on the windows, but there's nobody there. So for the most part, they kind of put it out of their minds and just ignored it. One particular evening, though, this knocking was exceptionally loud, they said. And it was even coming from beneath the car, not just on the windows. Now, obviously, up in the woods at night, it's dark. But he eventually turned on the inside light of the cabin, of the car, excuse me. And he said he could see a muddy handprint on the inside of the vehicle. Wasn't there before. Wow. The doors were locked. Obviously, the windows were shut. There's no way nobody could have got in it. Even stranger, though, he said when he tried to scrub this handprint away, it wouldn't move. It's not like it was just mud. It just would not, I don't know how he got rid of it. I'm assuming he did eventually. But he said it just wouldn't shift, basically. And as you can imagine, they were out of there. He's told his story recently, but he's not the only one. In the late 1990s, a police officer had her own bizarre experience there. She's a lady called Philippa Cole. And she was on duty one evening, and she was sent to respond to a road traffic accident on that stretch of road on the A363, essentially the Sally in the Woods Road. Now, she said when she arrived, she found a driver there. He had crashed his car into a tree. And the first thing he said to her is the lady okay? And so she's alert to this, and she's looking around for a supposed victim, expecting to find lying in the road, but there's nobody there. Nobody there at all. And he persisted with this. He said there was a lady in the middle of the road, and he had to swerve to avoid her. And he said that as he did this, as he swerved, he heard a piercing scream, which he assumed that he'd hit her, basically. And then obviously he'd crashed his car into the side. There was no sign of the woman, no sign of anything nearby. The driver wasn't over the limit. He wasn't driving carelessly. Just a complete mystery. There are other accounts, though, recently that have come to light. Shay Stew, now he was a youth group leader. He was leading several youths through the forest, I presume on a camping trip or a hike, and they suddenly saw a pinprick of light in the distance, and it was seemingly coming towards them. And as it got closer, obviously, it got a little bit larger. Right before it was on top of them, if you like, they heard this terrifying scream. And Stu described this sound as almost going through their bones. It was that loud. It was that otherworldly. So, we have certainly seen that there's something there. Plenty of people have seen it. The legends are rife. Now, the chairman of the Bathurst Society, Peter Martin, now he hasn't seen the spirit or the entity or whatever it is himself, but he does say that some facts do substantiate the legends surrounding it. He said, we mentioned Sally Gibson, he says that she did indeed live in the area. She was born in 1724, and her husband was, I suppose you'd say, not a poacher, but he had license to hunt on the land, and he could obviously sell his wares, and that's how they supported themselves. When he died, however, as is much the case then, there was no insurance, no one to take care of Sally Gibson. So she was forced to leave the house. That's when she took up residence in the hut, in the middle of the woods, a small little hut. And people say that she would hang mugs on the outside of her door, the outside of the property, in the hope that people would put coins in there. And so, the suggestion is that Sally Gibson could well be the screaming banshee of these woods. Now, banshee is normally an Irish thing. It's normally only revealed itself to Irish people or people with muck in the name, things of that nature. Although some people claim they have seen them. But yeah, I've not heard of this before, Paul. Actually, before it just kind of cropped up on my feed recently, and I thought, wow, that seems like a really, really authentic kind of strange goings on down there. And Somerset's awash with paranormal activity anyway. Most places have their own, but Somerset's is something a bit special about it. So I don't know if you've heard of this, Paul. I don't know if you've got an equivalent in the States, but it's frightening and fascinating at the same time, really.
No, I haven't heard of it. I've heard some banshee stories, and as you said, generally they're Irish. Either from Ireland or from Irish immigrants in the United States. The only thing similar that I can think of would be the Jersey Devil, the story of the Jersey Devil, which was was a child of a woman who had, I think, 13 children. Not to go into that story, but and I know there was screaming involved there too. So that's as remotely as I can get. The thing that about this, Marcus, is you said that it was a woman who went out into the woods and lived by herself. This, when a man goes out to the woods and lives by himself, we call him a hermit. That's probably the worst thing you could call them. But a lot of people call them wise men. They go out, they go to the top of a mountain and they live up there, and he's up there by himself because he's wise, or he's a writer, like the but when a woman goes out into the woods, she becomes a witch, or she becomes a demon of some sort, or a banshee. So I hear these stories and these folklores, and unfortunately that prejudice comes into my head. Oh, not another story where they're picking on women just for being women. Yeah. And the screaming, though, generally in all these stories, people say it sounds like a woman. So again, is it really a woman, or I don't hear too many men screaming, so I don't have a good sample base to judge whose screams sound like what. But no, I think what this goes to prove, Marcus, is that we don't know all the folklore. We are so far from learning all the folklore of all of our various cultures, and it's one of the reasons why I love being in the paranormal world and doing paranormal research. Is you find all these stories that start from maybe something fairly recent, a fairly recent event, and then all of a sudden you find out about this particular new banshee that we didn't even know about. So cool. So no, I don't. I've never heard of it, but I'm glad you brought it to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point. Just quickly pick up on it there. Like you said, I mean, the scream, we were just talking about non-human intelligence, demons. Who's to say that a demon's scream doesn't sound feminine? I mean, like, as you say, we don't
Exactly.
know.
Yeah.
This could
No.
just be real bad luck on this Sally Gibson's part that she happened to live in a
Yeah.
forest that a demon also happened to reside in. And yeah, you're right. You're right to point it out. Witches. I mean, it's mad to believe in our country right now there are witches that were executed and found guilty of being witches. They've not even been exonerated, despite campaigns going on for years. You would have thought
Yeah.
that'd be automatic, but no, it just goes on and on. And essentially, like you say, these women were more than likely ahead of their time in what they were actually doing in
Right.
connections to nature and alternative medicines. So yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if there's any more reports. It'll be interesting to see if that exoneration ever happens. It'll also, Paul, be interesting to see if there's any confirmation of the second Sphinx, which keeps doing the rounds. Because I believe we've got
Yeah.
information on that, and this has long been rumored, but
That's right. That's right. It has been. The Great Pyramid is the only seventh wonder of the ancient world that still exists. Uh, Pyramids in Egypt have long been favorite subjects of archaeologists and researchers and adventurers. So we're never going to lose it. And yet, um, as we've been talking about, for all the research that's been done out there, we still don't know the very basics of how these things were built, even when they were built, and that's where the Sphinx comes in. Uh, so yes, you're right. There's been rumors for centuries, millennia of a second Sphinx near the Great Sphinx, possibly lined up with it, guarding even more than what we can see. And it's back in the news because somebody else now claims, using modern technology, to have found something that looks like it might be a space that could be occupied by the second Sphinx. So I've qualified the heck out of that statement right there. This guy he's a radar engineer. His name is Filippo Biondi, and he was using satellite images taken of that area, and he says he found something very huge that he was measuring south of the current Great Sphinx, and he estimates that it covered by a 108-foot mound of, I guess, hardened sand would be what it was. So that's 10 stories deep. He claims that the scan that he's using shows an underground megastructure. So this is ground penetrating radar scans that he's talking about here. Sees an underground megastructure, and again, he's not the first to say that about the area underneath that pyramid complex, as it were. And he's not the first to use ground penetrating radar either. But that he claims that the first Sphinx sits slightly below the surrounding surface, a shallow depression. So he believes it's possible that there's a second Sphinx hidden underneath the mound. Now, archaeologists immediately jump in on this, and led by Zahi Hawass, the former minister of antiquities in Egypt, and a well-known archaeologist. He dismisses all of this. He says, it's unfounded. There's no evidence, and ground penetrating radar can't penetrate that deep, which is a true statement. The problem I have with all these guys is that Mr. Biondi is trying to get permission to do more studies, to do and more invasive studies of the area. And the same archaeologists who say this is impossible are the ones who are in charge of keeping that area from being analyzed in that type of invasive, possibly destroying some antiquity. So there's a battle there going on between science and preserving the area. The so the Sphinx. A lot of stories about the Sphinx go back to when was it first built, or when were they first built? And there's another new story coming up about the erosion of the Sphinx, and that the erosion couldn't have been done by wind. it looks too much like water erosion, which means that must have been some flooding, which means that there was a lot more water in that area. Again, no proof, but a lot of strong circumstantial evidence to that. But however, the one thing that everybody can point to say, yeah, what about this, is something called the Dream Stele, and that's Stele, not EEL, because it's not made of steel, it's made of stone. And what it is a vertical tablet that dates back to 1400 BCE. It's called the Sphinx stele as well, and we'll find out why. It was erected between the front paws of the Great Sphinx, so that's where you find it. The pharaoh who did it supposedly was Thutmose IV in 1401 during the 18th dynasty. He claimed that the stele claims that it legitimizes the divine legitimacy of the kingship. So the kingship, the pharaohship, was divinely passed down to all of the various pharaohs. Why are we talking about it? Because carved on the Dream Stele, the Sphinx stele, are a pair of cats, which everyone points to and says, those are the two sphinxes. We know they're there because the Dream Stele says they're there. That's all it says. No, it doesn't say anything else. It just has those two pictures. So extrapolation runs wild as a result. The mainstream Egyptologists say that, that there's certainly symbolism going on here, and it could conceivably be interpreted as being a picture of a second Sphinx, or an indication that there is a second Sphinx. But it's not literal, it's figurative. And the text, and there's writing on the stele that they've eventually been able to translate. Nothing in the text says explicitly that dig over here, there's another Sphinx right here. So again, here we are. We're arguing about we being the archaeologists and the preservationists, and possibly religious people as well, and the politicians all arguing, what are we going to do? I wish, and I want to preserve the ancient things as much as everybody else, but I also think that knowledge plays a part in this, and we should be able to. We have to accept that a little bit of destruction could provide us with an awful lot of knowledge, and if we could regulate the destruction, that with bad word in the United States, regulation, but if we could regulate that destruction in the name of science and in the name of knowledge, so many things would open up to us, and it would stop all the arguments and move on to appreciating more the construction of the Great Pyramids and the Great Sphinx and all these other monuments that we know so little about. I don't like mysteries. I like to write about mysteries, but I also like to know what's behind them. So I don't know. What do you think about that? Is there a second Sphinx, Marcus?
Well, I mean, you know what? I'm fascinated with ancient Egypt. I have been since I was a kid. I don't know why, but I just find it absolutely fascinating. It makes sense. Again, I'm just like kind of thinking out loud here, but it kind of makes sense to me. If there's only one Sphinx, if there is the only one, then that to me makes it even more special than it already is. And I don't mean because there's only one of them. Well, why would they build only one? Why? There's got to be a reason. So, yeah, it makes sense. You mentioned the two symbols of the cats. When you look at the head of the Sphinx, it clearly looks like it's too small for that body. It looks like it's been refashioned. I know people have said this, but it really looks like that too. Even how I know people associate cats with it, but even how the back is flat, it almost looks dog-like, how a dog would sit with attention. So who knows? I mean, that could have been another representation of Anubis. I know Anubis was a jackal, but essentially it's still of that canine family. So the thing with ancient Egypt, and more to the point, Egyptologists, mainstream Egypt, I don't want to come across as aggressive or anything, but I find there's a smugness to them. You know what I mean? I mean, like you say, there's people want to excavate, and it's just permission is denied more often than it's not. And what I find even more frustrating is when you have alternative archaeologists, if you like, for want of a better phrase, when you have them raise questions, they just kind of dismiss it with, oh, yeah, I expect you think the aliens built pyramids. And people aren't even saying that, outside of your ancient astronaut people. And so, again, I find there's a bit of a smugness to them, which I don't think does anybody any favors. It's really frustrating. But, I mean, there's 90% of that land hasn't even been excavated yet. Who knows what we're going to find there? And again, I don't know if you remember, I think it was about 97, 98. I think it was a French team. And they found what they thought was an open space under the Sphinx's paw. They were basically going out there to try and locate the so-called Hall of Records. And they didn't, say, oh, we found it. But what they did say is we found a space right here where Casey said it would be. And the dimensions are so, from what we can tell, they are so precise, it has to be man-made. It's not a natural cavity. And so they, applied for permission, thinking, well, we'll get this because we found this, there's all the data, and just flat denied. And it's still nobody's excavated underneath that paw. So I think, again, that smugness, it's almost doing it to themselves. I mean, there's the Pyramid of Khufu, it's so called. Again, this isn't fact because it's almost like they won't allow it to be fact. But it's pretty much well established that a British archaeologist painted the signal of Khufu there. It wasn't discovered. And I'm putting it over as fact, actually, because I've read that so many places. So we don't really know that Khufu built those pyramids. We don't know. And again, the Egyptians, they documented everything. Yet they didn't document how they built the pyramids or why. And again, I know people have said, well, we can prove that they built it with stone. I mean, they hammer away and they, all the little experiments by putting wood stakes down. And I said, that's great. Okay, yeah, you've proven that. Now do that 20,000, 50,000 times and do that within a 20-year period. Because it's all right just saying we can do it once. There's no evidence of slavery there. So the people who did build them, if it's people, and I'm not saying it's aliens, I do believe it were people, but where are all those people staying? Where are all those people sleeping? Right. Where's all the food coming from to feed them? I think they call it positive bias, don't they? Where they leave out all that stuff and just go on the attack, and they're almost protectionist, as if saying, no, it's ours, and you're not having it. And I find that very frustrating. So, I think there's much more to discover. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if there's a second Sphinx. I think there's so much more that left to come out. It's whether it'll be allowed to come out. And I can't understand, outside of, wanting to protect one's own theories, why they wouldn't want as much investigation as possible, really, Paul. So
I agree, Marcus. This is how conspiracy theories get started, and as much fun as conspiracy theories are, they go a long way in blocking our means of discovering the knowledge behind the mystery. So I agree with you 100% there. You guys have the same issue with Stonehenge, but at least at Stonehenge you can see evidence of where people were living around that area. And I think you're right. I'm sure, given the permission to do more research and digging in those areas, we would find that. We would find the answer. Let's put it that way. Bottom line is, at the end of the day, when you get told no as often as they've been told no, there, you start to say, what are they hiding?
Yeah.
And that's a terrible thing, because they may not be hiding anything. They may just be, as you pointed out, being arrogant about themselves. And arrogance has stopped research throughout history. So
absolutely agree.
I don't know if it has an effect, if arrogance has an effect on ghost research, but you've got a ghost story for us. Let's find out some details about that.
Well, this, take this with a pinch of salt, people, but this could be a public service thing, because, I know we're a long way from Christmas, okay, but, everybody feels the pinch at Christmas, so if you're looking to exchange goods for presents, listen to this. Now, we're back in Florida, and as a non-Brit, Paul, I don't know, but there seems to be a different breed down there, don't they? I mean, there's so many good stories comes out of Florida. So again, I don't know how accurate this is, but we're going to go with it because it's great. Apparently, a GameStop store in Florida, a chap walked in with a Tupperware tub, and he basically said, I've captured a ghost. It's right in here, in this tub, and I want to exchange this for credit. And so, the guys, they had a bit of a giggle with him, and he wasn't seeing the funny side, though. He was doubling down, saying, no, seriously, he even said it's a limited edition ghost, so I don't know what they are, but he knows more than we do, Paul. But yeah, he persisted. He was saying he wanted game credit or he wanted a console, and he would give them the ghost, in exchange. The staff politely refused, obviously, to go ahead with this, and he basically created a bit of a fuss, made a nuisance of himself, and even kind of warned the staff not to open the box because the spirit was active. Now, he was eventually arrested for causing a public disturbance, and the store has since issued a statement clarifying that they do not accept ghosts for credit. So that other stores might, who knows? So obviously, the kind of brain I've got, it got me thinking again. It's like Ghostbusters, this, isn't it? Where they're catching ghosts in the trap. Could we get to a point where that could happen? I know I don't mean with a Tupperware tub, obviously, but with the technology that's coming out, could we actually trap a spirit? And off the back of that, what would we do with it if we did? Is it in some kind of purgatory? Is it just like in what equivalent of a jail cell to them? Would we try and make money off it? I mean, we know people will make money off absolutely anything if they can. But yeah, you got me thinking, with all the advancements in technology, could we get to the point where we could trap a spirit, perhaps question them, communicate with them? But ultimately, what would we do with it if we did? What would we do with it? Would we release it? Would it be like the Ghostbusters films where they put them all in the unit? I don't know. Because we hear about mediums and psychics and people cleansing houses, sending spirits on their way, and I no doubt that works, to whatever degree. But again, actually physically trapping a ghost, I've got to think that I'm not saying we're around the corner on this. I'm not saying people have got desires on this. But I wouldn't be surprised if this happened in the next 10, 15, and 20 years. And obviously, before I hand it over to you on your thoughts on this, if anyone manages to do this, try your luck. Try and get that console. Try and get that next great present, because you just don't know. But what are your thoughts on this? I mean, first of all, Florida, wow, what a place.
I was going to say, yeah, we could start a podcast called "It Could Only Happen in Florida."
Absolutely.
And plenty of things to talk about, because I do that on my other podcast, where I talk about Florida all the time. And it's a strange, odd place in the United States with all kinds of things like that happening. I like you, people. I like that people took the man seriously enough to say politely, no, we don't accept ghosts for credit. I hope that's the way they acted. But here's what you reminded me of. Can we capture ghosts or spirits in some sort of container? It just reminded me of the genie. Now we talk about the genie or the jinn, and the most famous story is the genie in a bottle. So that genie was trapped. Now, what is the genie? Is the genie a physical entity? Is it a spirit? If it's a spirit, then here's another story. And I know we've had other, there's other folklorish tales of spirits being captured in some sort of receptacle. What did people do with the genie? They popped the cork and let it come out. I don't remember if the genie went back into the bottle itself, or if you had to create a vacuum and suck it back in. I don't really know. That wasn't one of my special areas. But you're right. What would you do if you had this entity captured inside some sort of container? Was Ghostbusters based on a real story that those guys are just not telling, the screenwriters aren't telling us about? I don't know. What you have to go back and define spirit in order to decide what kind of receptacle you would contain them in. And going back to our talk about extraterrestrials, this is the same discussion we should be having about extraterrestrials as well. And I'm gonna guess that politicians, and more importantly, the military, is thinking about things like this. And if they encountered some sort of ET that may not be of the same material as we are, how would they defeat it? How would they capture it? Maybe those are the guys we should be talking to. I don't know. certainly not some guy down in Florida trying to sell his box of box of Ghost. Get 12, buy 12, get one free. I don't.
Well, I mean, he might still have it. He didn't. He couldn't exchange it, so it could be sat on his shelf at home, Paul. I mean, if anyone
Yeah,
wants to capture a ghost, let us know. I'll send you a free postal address, and we'll check it out. But it really, yeah. I mean, it's a fascinating story. It's just one of those that makes you chuckle, but off the back of it, it makes you think, well, what if? What if? But the next one, we're going to delve into the past.
yeah, you got
It's
another
not that
one, yeah.
far. It's not that far away. It's only 2020. This, but you just said it there about the genie in the bottle. Now, you know, we cursed objects, cursed teddy bears, cursed dolls, as this one is. Perhaps that in itself is not necessarily capturing a spirit, but maybe having a spirit in some kind of physical form. Now, I'm sure you know what Frozen is. You've got grandkids, Paul. I'm sure you're sick of hearing the song that I'm not going to mention because I'm sick of hearing it too. At least my son was too old for the film, but I had to get it to all the other parents that I worked with at the time. But yeah, there's a Frozen doll, Elsa. Millions of kids will have this all over the world, no doubt. There's one family, though, in Texas who their daughter was given this Elsa doll as a Christmas present back in 2013. Now, it's designed to speak English and Spanish, depending on which setting you put it on. I'd assume it sings as well, I would imagine. But the doll started speaking in English to begin with, wouldn't speak in Spanish. And it was only when they looked to change the setting in his family that they realized it wasn't even switched on. It was turned completely off, yet it was still speaking. Now, that obviously spooked them to begin with. Then it switched. It started speaking only Spanish. And again, when it was not switched on. Now, I know that could just be a faulty switch. Somewhere inside it, it's just not connecting or whatever. You know, if you don't understand what you're looking for, which I don't, it could just be broken. But they also noticed that the child, their daughter, wasn't really keen on this doll. You know, she wasn't scared of it, but she wasn't happy with it. So they kind of decided, look, we're just going to get rid of it. It's not working and it's a bit unnerving. And so they threw it in the trash. And it came back, apparently. They found it in the garden. So this time they threw it away again. It came back and it was on the bench in the garden. Then they buried it, thinking, well, we'll get rid of it for good. And essentially it just kept returning. This happened several times. And they knew it was their doll. Because as kids invariably do, their daughter had used a magic marker pen and she'd coloured the body in various places. Maybe she was giving it tattoos. They're a real big thing now, aren't they? So maybe she was tattooing the doll. But whatever she was doing, they knew it was her doll. And it kept coming back to them. Now, to begin with, they contemplated using a Ouija board, trying to make contact with whatever was in this doll. And they quickly decided that wasn't a good idea. And I don't blame them. And as many of us do, instead of just Googling, she turned to social media for answers. Now, you can imagine there's a barrage of things. Some people said, as we've just discussed, look, it's just faulty. Take it back to the manufacturer. They'll probably give you a new one. Others said it probably is haunted because, you know, how do you explain it returning to the property outside of some like psycho basically watching you? And that's even more frightening than a haunted doll, I think. But yeah, so they were hit with loads of suggestions, and eventually they came across a chap online, this is, called Chris Hogan, his name was, and he offered to take the doll off their hands. So you know, the mother, she sent it to him. She didn't include a return address on purpose, so neither him or the doll could find its way back. And she said, in an unsettling twist here, the doll, remember, is turned off. It doesn't work. As she was posting this doll, as she was at the post office, she said she could hear it laughing inside the parcel, a strange, ominous laugh. Now, the doll did arrive with Mr. Hogan, and he posted a picture of it on online, and I'll flash that up to show that it was in its happy place. There'd been no paranormal activity, and that continues to be the fact today. And if Chris Hogan, if you're out there and you have experienced paranormal activity, get hold of us. We want to know about it. But yeah, but there's so many so-called haunted objects. You know, there's the Annabelle doll is probably the most famous. I know that's a little bit controversial recently, so we'll not really go into that. But it's not just dolls or teddies, haunted paintings. The Crying Boy is one that's one of the most famous ones. And during the 80s in England, for example, there were loads of house fires and they were blamed on this painting. It's a mass-produced painting, though, so I'm not really sure if I buy that or not. But one that is really, I want to mention real quickly, is a painting called The Anguished Man. It's a blue painting, or blue background, and there's the head and shoulders of a man. But it's like a man that's been stripped of all his flesh. Again, I'll flash this up so viewers can see it, but it looks really ominous. And the ominous backstory, though, is that painting was comprised partly of the artist's blood. And he was in a very bad place mentally when he did this. So who knows? I know the chap that owned it for several years. He said he had multiple paranormal activity in his home, not just door slamming, the usual stuff, but he said he was laying in bed one evening in what he thought was his wife cuddling up behind him. He turned around and there was this man, he said, from the painting. He eventually got rid of it. But yeah, I mean, so we've got the chap previously who claims he's caught a ghost, and you know, I won't quite put a mortgage on it, but I'll put a large amount that he didn't. But this, I don't know, Paul, it's a little bit more thought provoking, because I think it's a kind of thing that could really get to me. If somebody gave me an object and said, "Oh, that's haunted," I think I'd probably last about 24 hours, and then I would be burying it in the back garden as well. So exactly. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but yeah.
Wow. I haven't heard of that one. That's an interesting story. Obviously, we've all heard of Annabelle. But you're right. That in terms of a spirit occupying a doll, that's a common thing. Difference between that and the previous story is that we refer to the doll possessing or the spirit possessing the doll rather than the doll capturing the spirit. That's kind of the way those are differentiated, and that which implies that maybe the spirit could leave the doll at some point. And if so, if we could figure out how to make that happen, a lot of these people wouldn't have to be worried about. You wouldn't have to be burying the doll. You could put it back up on the shelf. It's funny that you mentioned this. I was visiting my grandnieces and nephews over the Easter holiday recently, and they have all kinds of stuff that talks. And I gave my niece an ancient Jack in the Box. So you know, how old I am. It has a monkey popping out of it, and you crank it, and it just reminded me of, oh God, I hope they, that if something goes haywire, she's going to think that there's a ghost inside of here, and the poor monkey's trapped. And luckily, my niece knows me better. So, but wow, it's these things to happen, and we were talking about selling the ghost. A lot of these dolls get sold instead of being buried in the backyard. There's a big market online for possessed dolls, particularly dolls. I don't know about any other receptacles that I'm aware of, but dolls seem to be predominant. So they're not going away. So we're on the cutting edge here of at least reporting on it, not necessarily solving the problem.
Like you say, it's an interesting one. It would be interesting to see if that guy actually did experience an activity, whether it was in the family's heads or not. But I mean, just changing course, it's hard to find a segue into this, but this is going to be no less fascinating. Tasmanian tiger. There's evidence that common knowledge, accepted knowledge says that this creature no longer exists, but that might not be the case, Paul.
No, it might not be the case, Marcus, and you're right. I've done many stories on the Tasmanian tiger, on its extinction, on its possible cloning. I like to point out, and when we talk about the Tasmanian tiger, its scientific name is the thylacine. But because most of the sightings and the predominant territory that it occupied was the island of Tasmania off the coast of Australia, that's where it gets its name. However, the Tasmanian tiger was also a resident of the Australian mainland, and that's where this story comes from. Because recently, even though the last Tasmanian tiger was, as far as we know, died in 1936 in a zoo in Tasmania, scientific research and archaeologists tell us that the last thylacine on the mainland disappeared 3,000 years ago. 3,000 years ago. Maybe not. That's the discovery. So they were doing research in Australia, in the Northern Territory, in Jalak Hill. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, and Awanbarna. So in the indigenous areas of Australia in the Northern Territory, and in a cave they found 14 previously unknown rock art drawings of thylacines, of creatures that looked exactly like Tasmanian tigers that were created only 1,000 years ago. So 2,000 years after they allegedly disappeared, when extinct, there's rock art drawings being discovered. There were also Tasmanian devils pictures, but most of them were of the Tasmanian tigers. The They had the stripes. They looked like dogs. They had all the things that you look for when you think of the Tasmanian tiger. So Paul Takan, a professor of anthropology and rock art at Griffin University, he said in a study that the artist who made the more recent paintings may have seen actual living thylacines, and some of these creatures may have survived longer than we believed in those lands. And these aren't cell phone images; these are drawings, so we can't say for sure how accurate they were. But nonetheless, that's as close as we're going to get without actually finding fossils. Uh, um, However, the skeptics say that maybe they were inspired. They were inspired by the folklore, as we've been talking about all throughout the podcast. They were inspired by the folklore of the Tasmanian tiger, and 2,000 years later, they're still drawing accurate pictures on a cave wall. I'm not sure I buy that as much as they were looking at one out the opening of the cave and said, "I'm going to draw that." So that particular area has one of the most detailed oral histories of the Tasmanian tiger. So adding to the belief that maybe it survived to only 1,000 years ago. Uh, of course, it's sacred land, and we're talking about desecrating the sacred lands of Egypt. People feel the same way in Australia. We can't go digging on the lands. We've already screwed these people over enough. Let's leave some of their sacred territories alone. Um, the the extinction. I like to talk about the guilt. It's the guilt extinction. We feel so bad about killing off the Tasmanian tigers and the passenger pigeons and the dodo bird that that's why we're still so interested and so hoping that they'll be found. Most scientists say that they believe that on the mainland, at least, they were killed off by dingo packs, and then eventually by the humans that came there. The so so this cloning thing, there's thousands and thousands of samples of thylacine, mummies and stuffed animals in museums around the world that people are slowly trying to extract DNA from, and they've been successful in extracting DNA. They've been successful in replicating the genome, and they've been successful to the point where they may have something that if only they could had another thylacine to implant it in, like we do with sheep and with dogs, so that the cells could grow into a brand new Tasmanian tiger. Unfortunately, we have nothing close. There's no marsupial that's close enough for them to do that. So that's really the roadblock that we've hit. But people are still seeing them, as you said. Most often in Tasmania, there's game cameras all over the place. People are seeing images of what they think is a Tasmanian tiger. It sure looks like it's the right size. It's got the right stripes. But again, are they finding spoor? Are they finding feces? No. Are they finding bones? Are they finding skin? Are they finding fur? No. So, we go back and forth. Is it this fantasy? Is it the guilt trip of wanting to say we didn't kill them off? There's still a few left. So I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. I think we should stop fighting and do more real research, both in Tasmania and in parts of Australia, to decide once and for all if there really are the Tasmanian tigers still in existence, or if we need to take that guilt and devote it towards saving all the other species on our planet that we're slowly but surely killing off too.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting stuff, Paul, because People say, like you say, oh, we'd find these creatures if they were there. They say it about anything, whether it's Bigfoot or whether it's something like this. The notion being that there's just too many humans for these things to hide. But I don't know that that's the case. There's plenty of uninhabited areas for a start where creatures could easily disappear. And add to that, that these creatures know these areas much better than we think we do. And, they can get in places that we just simply can't. We don't even know they exist. There'll be little hidey holes all over the place. I mean, I know that certainly it's not a great comparison, but, foxes, certainly in the UK, they're rarely seen outside of the country. But the fact is, you probably have a fox walk past your door every night. It's just that you're asleep and tucked away in bed. They know when to come out. They know when it's safer for them. So this could be the same with the Tasmanian tigers, for example. I like the idea of cloning. I know cloning is a controversial thing, and I know it's frowned upon by some people. But if we could bring these things back, and there's got to be a line here. We don't want to be bringing back, T-Rexes and things like that. We've all seen Jurassic Park. We don't want that. But little animals like this, it would be great to actually see them and bring them back if we could. And I think zoos get a bad rap as well in all of this because, if we just assume that every zoo is treating their animals as they should, and most of them do, let's be fair, I know there's been cases, but most of them do, then we should be glad of that because how many other animals would have been extinct if it wasn't for zoos? Taking them in, breeding them, and I know people say, well, they don't belong in a zoo, they belong in... Yeah, I get that. But at the same time, they're protected in the zoo. You put them out in wild and they're probably not going to last very long. So it's a fine line, that balance, isn't it, I think, between, these kind of things. But yeah, I'd like to see a cloning program strictly regulated, obviously, but I think it benefits to, like you said, just to learning and things like that. If we could see a dodo, for example, I don't know if we've got any dodo DNA out there, but it would be interesting to see if they could do this because, again, it goes either way. It could be used for good, it could be used for bad. But as well, you've got to have a little bit of faith in humanity that, 9 times out of 10, maybe they do the right thing. I don't know. Yeah. But again, Paul, it just shows you that our planet, it's a weird and wonderful place, and it's full of all sorts of strange goings on out there. It really is.
That's right. And we don't know everything. As far as the Tasmanian tiger is concerned, its territory still looks pretty much like it did when, if they did go extinct, when they still lived here. It's only maybe a century or two ago. It's not like the woolly mammoth, which they're trying to clone that lived 10,000 years ago. It doesn't exactly look like Earth 10,000 years ago. So it's a hard thing to do. And bottom line is, I think, with all scientific research, but it generally has one goal in mind. But what we end up finding out is that the discovery can be applied to so many other areas, and that to me helps justify spending the time, for example, to clone something that I may never see, but the scientific benefits will be far more beneficial to many other areas. That is a worthwhile cause. And you're right. We live in a mysterious, strange, and wonderful world today, and it's great to be able to talk about it. It's great to hope that there's more to come.
Oh yeah, for sure, definitely. It's just full of strangeness, bizarreness, but intrigue, our planet, and I'm glad we're here, Paul. And I'm glad we've got another run of fascinating stories, and obviously we're going to have some more next week. But as always, thank you for joining me. It's been absolutely fascinating again, Paul.
Thank you, Marcus. It was truly a fascinating show again. I hope everybody out there had as much fun and learned some things from what we talked about today and enjoyed it as much as we do, both researching and presenting it to you every week. So thanks for joining us.
No, absolutely. And I'm one of the people that has learned a few things today, so I can second that. But
right.
Absolutely. So, as always, as Paul said, thank you guys for joining us. Make sure you tell everyone about us. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. Check out Paul's stuff on Substack. Check out Me Time for the Mind. And make sure you join us next week for more fascinating stories. Until next time, goodbye and take care.